Everybody. I'm Captain Dave with the AtCup, and our kids program is sponsored by 11th Hour Racing, and I've got a really interesting person joining us today, Grace from We Are Neutral. And We Are Neutral, well, I'll let Grace introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what you do, Grace, and what We Are Neutral is all about.
Definitely. Well, thank you for having me, Dave. I'm so excited to talk about We Are Neutral and how we can all come together in the spirit of a healthier planet. We Are Neutral is an environmental nonprofit based in Gainesville, Florida. We help people and businesses understand, reduce, and offset their carbon footprints. So basically, we look at the energy people use, the travel that's being done, all sorts of lifestyle habits, and how they translate into carbon emissions being created. Once we understand what carbon emissions are being created or what impact something has on the planet, we then perform environmental good work and environmental projects in communities to offset that impact. So trees are a great example of this because humans breathe out carbon dioxide and trees take it in turn give us oxygen. So we do a lot of tree plantings. We help people live more energy efficient lives, and we do a ton of work with environmental education. I found out about We Are Neutral as a student at the University of Florida. I studied sustainability studies, environmental science, and business. So that all encompasses what I do today with We Are Neutral and how our work is done. Basically, when I was going to school, it was the first time I had really heard about sustainability. So I was always passionate about being outside, plants, and I was just immediately drawn to working in this sort of field and being involved in the natural sciences and natural surroundings. So I love what we do with We Are Neutral. It's a really unique organization, and I'm so happy we've been able to partner with the AtCup for a while now.
Well, great. So I guess we want to get into what is a carbon footprint, but before you answer that, so when you said you were interested in this in school, how far back to your youth were you interested in maybe starting recycling and stuff like that, or looking at the planet? Were you the same age as these students when you started, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. I actually grew up in New Jersey, so I moved to Florida right before I went to the University of Florida. So I kind of traveled down south almost the same route as the AtCup, and I've always just loved seeing different environments. I used to go camping a lot, always liked to be outside. It was my favorite place to be. So the interest was always there. I think I slowly started to realize that it's a field of sustainability, and that's the subject that I can really go forward with. But I've always been this little earth warrior at home, recycling and things like that. So it's so cool to see how it's transitioned and how there's so much room to grow in having a passion for the planet.
Well, that's neat. That's a lot like me. My love has been the water since I was about 12 years old, and I not only when you become that close to nature and that sort of aligned with and maybe even embedded spiritually with nature, you realize how important it is to help it along and to help people go. So let's explain to me what you see a carbon footprint is. What's that mean to maybe a 12-year-old, and what's it mean to a 30-year-old?
Yeah, so a carbon footprint, as a more kind of technical definition, is just a measure of greenhouse gases created from a person, a place, an activity, or a thing. Everything has a carbon footprint. So that's basically a way of saying everything has an impact on the planet. Your home has an impact on the planet. The school, when you go to class, there's an impact on the planet from having the lights on, traveling there, eating cafeteria food. So your car, getting in a plane, like eating pizza, watching TV, even the AtCup, everything has an impact on the planet. So a carbon footprint is a way of measuring that sort of impact. With the AtCup, for example, we help the race understand the carbon footprint of sailing. So we look at boats and what impact they have on the environment, what sailors' impact on the environment is, all the little bits and pieces of an event. When people hop in their cars to drive somewhere, you might notice smoke coming out from the back exhaust. That's an example of how a car is impacting the environment. You can see that smoke. Most of the time, you can't really see what impact something has on the environment. There's no exhaust pipe when you're eating a cheeseburger. So what We Are Neutral does is we like to figure out what that impact is and help people understand it, because it's kind of an abstract subject. What We Are Neutral focuses on is carbon-related emissions, and carbon itself is an element. So all living things have the component of carbon. It's very important. We need it to survive. And many science classes will really dive deep into this. But what We Are Neutral kind of looks at is the carbon emissions created from human activities. So there's so many humans out there nowadays, and there's a ton of carbon emissions being created.
So, well, I guess when I go hiking or walking along the beach, or when I go sailing, I always felt as though I was being, really, really sensitive to the planet. But I guess even with the big sailboat, there's a carbon footprint from that sailboat. So even though I'm using the wind and we're just sailing along, I have to understand that the products that made to make the boat create some carbon footprint. And when I drove the car down to the harbor to get on the boat, I expended some carbon footprint there. And that's all the little pieces that make a whole big puzzle, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, exactly. We have to say you can almost go down a rabbit hole. So even if you're riding your bike, like what food did you eat to fuel yourself when riding the bike? Or we work with a lot of companies and people that are interested in having a zero carbon footprint. They just want to get rid of their impact on the planet. Well, humans, like we said earlier, breathe out carbon dioxide. You're never going to stop emitting carbon emissions. It's more about taking responsibility for that impact or being aware of it. So in sailing and using the wind, you're being environmentally friendly by not necessarily having an engine or something like that. But it's still so fun to go down that rabbit hole and to think, like, what about the sail's materials, or when I drove here, or things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, for the students that are watching, and maybe some of the parents as well, um, I guess we want to care about this because it's about being a good steward of our earth and our oceans, keeping our ocean clean, keeping the earth clean, keeping the environment clean. But how should a student or a parent or whatever kind of look at this and care about it, and what's the impact? You know,
Yeah, definitely. That's a
Strange
great
question.
question. Yeah, a lot of times we hear people understand that they have an impact on the planet or that they're using energy with their lights, but they're not sure why exactly they should care about it, or what's the point of studying this moving forward. So I believe now more than ever, humans really do need to take action for the planet and just understand the impact they have on the world. The planet only has a certain amount of resources, so we can only take so much from the planet, and we don't want the planet to be overwhelmed. We're already seeing kind of the effects of how humans have interacted with the planet so far through climate change. Now, climate change is just what it sounds like. The overall climates of the world are changing a little. And the Earth has gone through stages of transformation before, but it's the rate of this change or how fast these changes are happening that has scientists a little concerned. What does that look like really? We've heard reports of like animals facing extinction. In Florida here, we've had some pretty intense hurricanes the past few years. I haven't seen snow in a while, but I've heard the past few winters up north have been pretty intense, and just other areas of the US noting some extreme weather. Along the coast, you might hear of sea level rise. So all of these big picture events going on in the world that actually relate to each and every one of us. So it might seem like such a huge concept, but in considering the impact we have on the planet, we're able to make a change. So We Are Neutral is here to help people understand the role they have in all of this, understand the role in sustainability we have, and to really develop a sense of scale for which actions have maybe a larger impact than other actions.
So I guess as we consider our carbon footprint on the Earth, we're considering what our effect is and what our contribution is to climate change, and the warming of the oceans and sea level rise and all those things that are really important to all of us because they affect humanity around the world. Um, During this COVID-19 thing, I've seen some reports from the scientists at NASA and stuff where they're looking down through satellites and they're seeing a great change in the pollution and stuff because of factories being shut down from workers and all that. So is that sort of like a real intense look at what changing the carbon footprint would mean to us? Obviously we're all just small, one individual person, and we're taking good care of ourselves and recycling where we can. But is that really a good uh, indicator of what, if we made a significant change in our carbon footprint, what would happen?
Yeah, for sure. And there's been reports similar to that where, if humans stopped driving today, what impact would that have on the planet? And it would take a while for the planet to see those sort of impacts. So the COVID-19 situation has been going on for a bit now. So it's taken a while for scientists to start compiling these reports of what does it look like when businesses aren't operating as normal? What does it look like when most humans aren't driving? So the longer that we enact these changes, the greater impact it's going to have on the planet. So if a business is just closed one day a week, that's not necessarily going to have as great of an impact as what we're seeing now. And the most inspiring part of this whole situation for me is to see these sort of changes and to know that moving forward, there has to be a change in the way that we've been living our lives. This event has been life-changing, so it's going to impact how we move forward, and it's up to us to kind of make that a positive situation.
So that's kind of cool. So then this terrible event that we're all going through around the world lets us all know that we all live on this planet, regardless of our country boundaries and stuff, and that we're all part of this planet and part of our environment. One of the things I always tell the kids when I'm on the ocean, the entire world is my playground. I can sail anywhere, go anywhere. And so, the water, the oxygen, the environment, the weather, mixes it all the time. But so that's kind of neat that we can see what huge impacts could happen if we had drastic change. But the reality is we're not going to have drastic change. We're all going to get back to work here, and we're all going to get back to some normality in life. But so what are the small changes that we can do as students and as individuals to be as good about being a good steward of the earth as we can?
Definitely. We get this question a lot at We Are Neutral, just as an environmental group. The number one thing we usually tell people is to become more aware of their impact. And that might not sound like much, but in adapting a new mindset, changing your perspective, you can really implement a lot of changes moving forward. So the more you learn about climate change, the more you learn about the world and how we're all connected, we can talk more with one another about it. And we'll also start to think about the planet in everything you do. And it's having this awareness that brings long changes. So humans have always shared and collaborated, maybe not hopped on Zoom calls, but we've always been talking to one another. And in order to change, we need to come together to make those changes. Some of the tiny actions and more personal things that people can do, let's say at home, that have a big impact. When you're not in a room, turn the lights off. Or when it's a sunny day out and you don't need the lights on, you can leave them off. Typically at home, the largest part of a home's carbon footprint and the impact that they have on the planet is the lights that we're using and our AC and heat. We can't really avoid using lights entirely. So while we want to do the best that we can, it's important to acknowledge we still need lights and we still need to turn the AC on and the heat. But it's more so asking yourself, when you turn on the light switch, where is this light coming from? How do we have the energy to do this? And you'll wind up learning more about the resources on the planet and how we're connected to them in multiple ways. There's tons of little suggestions I can bring, so I'm just gonna keep hitting with you with some of them. When you're sitting down to eat, people might not want to hear this, but the more veggies and the green on your plate, the better it is for the planet. So eating plant-based can go a long way. When you're traveling, if you consider how you're getting to where you're trying to go, riding bikes is amazing for the planet. So any young students out there who love riding bikes, keep that with you and keep bringing that along as you travel through your life. Taking the bus to school is actually better than everyone driving separately. So it's little things like this that add up to have a larger impact. You can try using reusables. When you throw something away, there's really not an away. All trash goes somewhere. So recycling is great, but for the most part, trash ends up sitting in a big pile known as a landfill, which can then have a huge impact on the planet. When it comes to water bottles, a little fun fact we like to throw out is that bottled water has a carbon footprint 1,000 times the carbon footprint of tap water. So you can see it might not seem like such a big impact whether you're turning on the faucet or grabbing a water bottle from your fridge, but it really can increase tenfold when you think about the rabbit hole of where this water came from, the materials being used. Ultimately, no one's like perfect. So for the planet's situation to improve, we don't need one person acting perfectly environmentally friendly and everything you do, like you said, that's not really realistic, these huge drastic changes of perfect environmental conditions, but it's more about millions of people trying to do them all imperfectly. You know, it's trying your best, it's adapting. If you have water bottles at home, it's totally okay. It also comes back to just acknowledging the impact that they have, knowing that it has an impact, or talking about it with one another, like asking why you have these water bottles or why someplace doesn't have recycling. It begins the conversation and maybe opens their eyes to say, like, we do need recycling here, or we can do a little bit better. And then lastly, like with, oh, you can go on.
It always seems to me as though the biggest impact are the first steps, you know, on a curve, you know, when you decide to no longer use bottled water in your house and use reusable water and a filter at the sink to get tap water. You know, that initial change is the biggest thing. It's really, when you get to the end of it and you're trying to really refine it, is where you make the smallest change. But so just making that first or second step to get yourself from to doing a little bit is a big help to everybody.
Yeah, I always like to look at it when I've tried to be more sustainable in my life is kind of separate it into little parts. So rather than try and just be an awesome environmental earth warrior all the way around, say, okay, how am I getting my water? Okay, now what food am I eating? Or how am I traveling? If you kind of focus at one part at a time, it doesn't necessarily seem like this big, scary change that has to happen. You can kind of take those first initial steps in each part of it. And then slowly, like you said, learn more details about it and learn little changes that you can make to continue improving.
Well, that's great, Grace. This is a great conversation. We could go on for a long time because there are so many
Yeah.
ways that you know, students and adults and their parents and actually the students kind of can encourage their parents and their grandparents to help out in this overall effort that we're all making to try to be better to the earth and a better steward and clean up the oceans and like that. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and let's do this again soon.